Hey, welcome to a review, and this one is quite a new knife, at least at the time that I'm recording this. It's the Vosteed Valkyrie. This is the Seax, or S-E-A-X, style blade, which basically ends up looking like a knife that, or a sword that has had part of it broken away, and they've kind of repurposed the blade edge there. But for all intents and purposes, they're like a Warncliffe. There's also a sheepsfoot blade shape on these guys as well, but generally given between the two, I do kind of prefer a Warncliffe, so that's why I went with this one in particular here. This is kind of like what the fourth model or something like that that has used this particular locking mechanism. It's essentially a button lock, but the whole plunge mechanism actually goes through the blade tang rather than riding around the outside of it like a lot of other ones do. This is something that the creator Yudong has kind of come up with. It was first implemented on here we go. There's Kaiser Cormorant. That was kind of one of the first ones that they ended up working with, and this is a Yudong model as well. This is the titanium variant, but they've also done a couple other variants there. They've also at least licensed it out to this one in particular, the Kaiser Hiccup. This is an Azo design, but like I said, they at least licensed that lock. But as far as I know, these are the two that Kaiser have done with that. They've done plenty of other button locks, but they're not this kind of a lock that threads through the blade rather than riding around the tang. So there we go. And then this one, like I said, from Vosteed, they've done a couple others. There was definitely the Thunderbird that did. There's this guy, the Raccoon, which was the previous one that also has that same locking mechanism there. And there's this guy here. These ones, just like the Cormorant here, are really designed with fidgetability in mind. This one has a thumb stud rather than a hole, but still, you have front flicking, or you got thumb flicking. You got the reverse flick. You got the standard flippers, and then you have the front flipper sort of thing going on here as well. If I don't end up screwing it up. But there you go. So these are really designed for just doing a heck of a lot of play. Same with the Cormorant here. Same basic kind of concepts going on. And it works for making the knife just a lot of fun in a whole bunch of different ways. This one is, well, I do think basically all of them so far are in G10, which is... It's a little interesting. The Raccoon, most of them were in micarta. I think there might have been some G10 variants. But, yeah. Either way, these things weren't incredibly cheap, I suppose. It is using 154 cm steel, which is good. Maybe something they ended up taking as a good idea, and or possibly some distribution or procurement, since they were working with Kaiser for a little bit there. The Raccoon here was using 14C28N, so a little bit different steel. I do definitely prefer, if I have my choice, to go with 154 cm. I like the steel quite a bit. It was good enough for Benchmade for a very, very long time once they finally moved away from 440C. So there's definitely that. We do have a little bit of a sunken in area. However, the button can fully disengage that blade before you fully make it into there. So it helps maybe a little bit, but not quite as much as you might actually assume. But still, overall, this thing works in a lot of different grips. And even though your finger will generally fall in there if you are doing a reverse grip, for one, unless you're really squeezing the ever-loving crap out of it, and even then, I'm only getting a little bit of movement, not a full unlock. And of course, your force is going to be going the other way on there. So I generally don't have a problem with that. Standard pinch grip, the way that I would do it without contacting the blade, I have no problems with coming in contact with that. And of course, the standard pinch grip when I'm actually up on the blade for using that for really, really precise kind of cutting, especially something horizontal if I'm cutting tape on a box that I'm opening up or something like that. Super easy to slide the tip in there before the tape and pull through it and all that sort of stuff. Super, super great for all that sort of stuff. And it's not bad in a reverse grip. Maybe a little bit small since I do like to have my thumb fully secure for something like that. But at least the blade shape is definitely designed for the pokey in case that is something that comes up in your particular use case, whether you like it to or not. So there we go. The action on it's pretty decent. It has just a little bit of friction, so it's not absolutely crazy swinging in the breeze, but it's absolutely not necessary because it's really easy to deploy it in so many different ways. And still pretty close to a drop shot, so it doesn't really matter. However, I have noticed that the raccoon, which I only basically had for like a week and a half before I ended up getting this guy, does feel just a little bit more smooth overall. It is a little bit less frictiony. So I suppose I'll say that there. This one is a little bit different than the raccoon in that we do have the liners fully exposed, whereas they are nested on the raccoon, which I do tend to prefer a little bit more. But, this is certainly a little bit more of a budget thought process on this thing in particular. We have just a little tiny hint of a sway back sort of thing going on there. And I do really appreciate that we can swap that pocket clip from side to side. Unlike Metal Complex, I actually do have some problems with this pocket clip. I do love that it's inset into the scale material, that it's using flush screws. All of that's good, but this really, to me, isn't quite enough thickness there. And I have had it a little bit difficult to start to get into a pocket if I'm using some thicker material, something like some duck canvas pants, since I like to wear a lot of Carhartt stuff. I run into that a little bit, and this does take a few attempts before I actually successfully get that lodged in the pocket correctly, instead of just slipping past it or hitting that and completely stopping and making me worry that I'm just going to tear through some material if I continue to shove hard on it. So there's that in particular. This thing has a sound to it, and it's not a ringing sound. But here, let's see. I'll go ahead and open it a couple of times here next to the mic. And I don't know if you necessarily pick up on that from the microphone, but it's not a single sound. It's kind of makes a little doing kind of sound to it. And I have kind of understood that the plunge mechanism here, which also acts as the stop pin for it in the open position. Not the closed position. It's still got one back there, but in the open position there. And this stuff is using a little bit softer steel to kind of help lock bar or the lock mechanisms health over time. And you might be kind of thinking that's a little bit counterproductive. You want something to be nice and hard and strong and rigid, and that's certainly what they've done. Like with the Kaiser Cormorant, that's definitely using a little bit harder material. This is probably a 420 J2 or something like that, rather than 410 or something like that. That's a little bit softer going on here. But the thought process, I do think, was over time, the softer material can end up getting a little bit. It's a little bit more malleable. And in that way, it can conform a little bit over time. That can potentially, over a very, very long period, unless you're doing something absolutely crazy, end up with a little tiny bit of up and down blade play. But it does kind of prevent something from happening that might be eventually a catastrophic failure. Either the that lock piece or the liners, not on something like that, but yeah, on something like these guys where it's the steel liners going on there. That one of them would end up failing because they're going to be softer than that particular steel. So that's kind of my understanding there. So it does sound and feel just a little bit softer rather than fully rigid. It doesn't feel insecure whatsoever, as far as I can tell. But still something that I could certainly bring up here. It does have a fairly decent finger choil here, but right there next to the kind of larger flipper sort of thing, if I were to really want to creep up all the way, I'm still going to end up making contact with the blade. So still not exactly a finger choil that's going to work out super great for me. I do feel a little bit safer if a knife doesn't have an overgrind, something like the Cold Steel Tough Light, or most Spydercos, even though they don't have a sharpening choil whatsoever, they do still feel much safer to me, even if I have a little bit less finger reach. But that has nothing to do with this particular knife in general, just my personal preference on finger choils overall. So there we go. We got a little bit of circular weight relieving going on here, which relieves it a little bit. You could probably skeletonize it a little bit more, but you wouldn't be able to just use the standard circular router bits for that. You would probably end up having to do a little bit of milling to do kind of opposing triangles or something like that to keep the same structural rigidity. So I certainly understand that. Yep, on the pocket clip, we do have the little, there we go, little maker's mark going on there. And it's a lot of fun to play around with. And the steel seems to be all right. It didn't take an enormous amount of work for me to reprofile it. But that being said, it did feel better. And I do assume that it's going to end up working out better than the QSP Gannett that I got, that actually was the only 154 cm knife that I've personally had that had some fairly poor performance going on that. And I don't know if that was just a particular little batch from QSP or something like that, because it was certainly one of the first knives that they'd produced with the steel. But so there you go. It's fairly middling. It feels about like Kaiser's and a lot of other companies, 154 cm that's out there. So I don't really have any worries that the blade material or anything like that is going to get dull anywhere near as fast, or that's not what I'm saying. I don't really have any worries that the blade steel will get dull faster than other manufacturers who are also using 154 cm, since this stuff is supposed to be a lot like 14C28N in that it's fairly easy to get a good heat treat going on them. It's nowhere near as complicated or finicky as powder metallurgy can be. So there we go. I do have a little bit of trouble actually getting the pocket clip into my pocket on some thicker things, but it does disappear into the handle quite a bit. So that's great. I do like the I guess the little notch here, which kind of makes me think a little bit of a harpoon sort of thing. But still, for me, the jimping way back here, for me, just straight up doesn't work. I'm just going to say that there. That basically relies on you using a very, very relaxed saber grip, and I don't feel anywhere near as secure in this grip as I do kind of getting a little bit more meaty grip on there, to use kind of a hybrid between the saber grip and a hammer grip. That feels much more secure to me in the hand, but there's no jimping up here whatsoever. So I would have kind of preferred that they extended it, kind of like they basically jimped an enormous portion of the cormorant there, so that you could have that a little bit beforehand, or really get on top of that. So in that way, I would kind of appreciate a little bit more jimping. However, the raccoon actually ended up getting jimping a little bit in a better position overall. At least for me and my particular preferences. I do like that it's fairly easy to remove the thumb studs. I tend to like to do that when I'm sharpening or reprofiling a knife, just so I don't accidentally hit those, which I've definitely done on, on my Benchmade in the past. That being said, though, because of the finger choil, that thumb stud isn't really in the blade path, which is quite important, I think, for a lot of knives these days. So that definitely ticks that checkbox there. Let's see. I don't really think there's a huge amount else that I really wanted to cover on there. I haven't done any kind of measurements or anything like that, and I forgot to write them down. So let's go ahead and check them out here. This is, of course, with the thumb stud there, it's going to be just a little bit more of a pain in the ass. I will go around here. But, yeah, about just a touch under 3.2 inches for the blade length on this guy here. And then, of course, that's going to be about 81.15. So you can either take it to 81.1, 81.2, either way. So a decent blade length there, maybe a little bit shorter, especially because you are losing quite a bit of that sharpened area to a choil there. But hey, at least the plunge grind is nice for it. So there's that. Let's see, the blade stock thickness on here. It's basically 3 millimeters. Which is pretty good. It's a decent slicey kind of a characteristic, especially for 154 cm. You could go down to 2.8, but I would generally want to do that for a smaller knife overall. Just kind of a personal preference, I suppose, for the rigidity of all of that sort of stuff here. Let's see. Then we got 0.47 of an inch. Or basically 11.9, or just under 12 millimeters thickness there. And, well, let's see. I also do have my scale here, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of that. Start in ounces. I got 3.555 ounces, so 3.56. Or just under 101 grams. So there we go with that. What if we do a couple of blade comparisons here? Let's go ahead and start out with the Spyderco PM2. Seems to have a little bit of the same kind of size things going on there. Sure, we'll pull out the Endura 4. That's way too large. This is probably much more in that Delica sized. Maybe in between the Delica and the Indela. But definitely not super enormous. And that is for sure. There we go with the Benchmade bug out. And the 940. 940 is just a little bit larger in most of the dimensions. So that will probably help you out quite a bit in kind of that sort of size approximation. There we go with the rat one. That one's pretty darn large. And I am looking for... Oh, it's still in my drawer. The K-Bar Dozier Folding Hunter, since that's kind of a smaller thing out there. About the same kind of handle length going on, but yeah. And about the same amount of actual cutting length of the blade, but this does have that fingerish choil going on there. So there we go. Those are kind of my thoughts on this guy. I suppose we can take them apart in case you actually want to see that. That requires me to actually find my screwdrivers here. Let's see. Kind of an unfortunate thing is T6 hardware for basically everything but the pivot. I especially kind of understand that for some newer manufacturers because T6 hardware is much more prevalent in the industry. So if you're starting out, you're probably not purchasing in enormous quantities, which is why they've mostly done these as particular drops on their website, even though they have sold some to White Mountain Knives, which is where I got the raccoon from. But they generally only allow them to purchase 10 of each type. So fairly low production numbers on those, which is why I can kind of understand why they end up using the T6 hardware. It's not my favorite, but I suppose it does make sense just that it's much easier to appropriate as a smaller company. But alrighty. There we go with that. And we can pull this guy off. Yep, there's where that spring ends up going on. These things are a little bit more finicky to put back together after the fact. But yeah, here we go. Then we got the little circular things in there. Nice and rounded off and polished there. We got that little D shape going on for the pivots. And then we can pull this off. And yeah, as you can see, the little plunger guy is fully captive in here. I've, of course, lubricated around there. So that's why all of that is the way that it is. All greasy and shiny looking. And yeah, on this one in particular, I'm not sure which side actually unthreads. Like I said, I haven't really been able to unthread mine, and because of that, I kind of don't want to. But there you go. Something also to keep in mind that can be a little bit funky. Generally wasn't on this one in particular, but with these types of locks, and it's a little bit more difficult to see on the titanium Cormorant here, but like the other one here, they do have a little steel frame around there, so it's not just riding on the G10 pure. It has basically these little insets on to kind of reinforce that a little bit. Just helps the whole stay in that uniform sort of thing, which for G10, probably not much of a big deal at all. For micarta, probably a little bit more of a problem. But so there we are with that. This one, yep, like I said, D-shaped pivot. It is on the it's not the lock or the show side, so I guess it's on the lock side. Which, hey, that is what it is. It's not exactly my my first preference, but it's certainly not going to hurt any of that. I guess the nice thing about these little plunger sort of things being incorporated into the blade is when they are actually seated properly, makes it really easy to install them through that hole. With the blade there, it does take off a little bit of time when you actually are trying to slap these damn things back together. So there's that, and then I can put the little spring on there, and as long as you make sure that you put the thing on straight down rather than just kind of sliding it on from one side or the other, makes it really easy to put this thing back together. That being said, it helps if I actually... There we go. it's yeah, the pivot screw was a little bit magnetic, and it was actually working against me rather than with me on this one in particular here. But there we are. Okay, yeah, these guys are using hardware that's not magnetic, which kind of makes sense. That's why my assumption is they're using a 410 for the steel on the little lock bar plunger thing, because a lot of times with hardware that isn't magnetic on some models, a lot of times they are going to use a 410 for that material. I suppose some knives actually use that for their like Sanmai construction. I think the Knife Center exclusive Delicas and Enduras and all that sort of stuff with the HAP 40 blades use 410 for the little sandwichy sort of things there. But yeah, I don't quite have the pivots as tight as it should be, but everything else is kind of in place. Now it is. Feels like maybe just a little touch over tighten, but yeah, you can dial that in pretty well. Yeah, all sorts of good. There we go. All right, so as I said in the beginning, this was actually a part 2 or a part 1 that I recorded after the part 2. That has to do with a whole bunch of lock bars, or locks in general, between button locks, compression locks, back locks, all that sort of stuff, because there's been a little bit of that kind of talk, especially referring to this particular company, and I kind of wanted to give my 2 cents on some of that. But because that part is also fairly long, I'm going to release it as a video maybe later in the day or possibly on the next day. So, alrighty. As always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your day, yo. Subscribe. Peace. Man, I am just having a hell of a time trying to get out exactly what I want to in a nice and concise manner here. This is the second part of the Vosteed Valkyrie reviews that I've been working on here. There's been some things that have been going around in the community a little bit about the locks having a couple of problems here, and I wanted to address that, especially in the same video rather than in a separate one that was going to come out alongside it, because people aren't going to necessarily watch that subsequent video after the fact, and I want all of it in one place so I avoid a whole bunch of unnecessary comments where people would try to call me out or something like that for glossing over it or not talking about it at all. So, okay. First thing, these guys in particular, this is the Trek lock. This is the inside of it. And you can see it's basically a button lock, but it rides on the inside of the tang there. And the way that that's attached is it basically has 2 pieces, and they are threaded together. Mine are super, super tight on this one and my raccoon. But apparently some people have become kind of loose in their threads over time, because this does take a lot of impact when you're deploying the knife in a whole bunch of different ways. Over and over and over. And yeah, if that guy comes unthreaded, well, then the button falls out. And for one, if you lose it, you're kind of dungeon rings as far as trying to get the knife to stay closed or stay open. It's basically, you got to send it back to the manufacturer for them to replace that. And they did basically make a statement about, yeah, we'll probably for future implementations of that add thread locker in there. My suggestion, which somebody probably doesn't want to hear, but it would probably be best if they used permanent Loctite on there. And the reason why I say that is it's going to hold up to a little bit more of that impact stuff over time. And unless you're actually trying to modify the flats of these particular blades, there's absolutely no reason you need to remove that ever. And basically, if you do, well, you're basically going to create the problem that's already on here by having thread locker that's not actually locking it. So there's that. Um, so there's the first thing, and that hasn't affected a huge amount, but certainly enough that it does need to be addressed. And sounds like they did. Next thing, which is something that's been going around a little bit. I don't know, some crazy people would probably call it whack gate or a spine gate or whatever kind of gate it is. Essentially, these guys can dislodge the blade from the lock position from doing spine whacking with it. The lock does not break, so I mean, there's certainly that, but there is some concern about that. And I kind of wanted to give my 2 cents on all of that sort of stuff and kind of cover it here. So, yes, that is something that some people have noticed is doing some spine whacking. Let's see if I can find another button lock. Oh, sure. I got the Kaiser Cormorant here. But yeah, slamming that down on a surface, preferably if you're trying to do that test, not on some rubbery kind of material there. And it will cause the blade to disengage, like I said. And how it was implemented on the Kaisers here was a little bit different. The locks are exactly the same, but the lock interface, that whole plunger thing on the Kaiser ones, were a harder steel, I think. But I'm not quite sure. They had mentioned 420 J2 for that kind of for the lock face material, which is, it's not great for a blade material, but it's fairly easy to get harder than a lot of liner materials and stuff like that. So there's that. The problem with doing it that way is if you are doing some sort of impactful or other destructive testing or something like that, when something does fail, it's going to fail catastrophically. Most likely, it's just going to be the little plunger locking mechanism. But if it's not, then then it's actually going to be the liners that end up cracking, possibly alongside it or one or the other. It really depends on exactly how all of that stuff goes down in your particular instance, if that's something that would end up happening to you. And when Yudong was manufacturing these for Vosteed, kind of had a little bit of a different idea for it. So this plunger sort of thing here is a bit softer steel than I think the Kaisers end up using. 410, I think. I think that's what he mentioned, but again, I don't have all the information from the Facebook posts and everything like that right in front of my face at the moment. But the thought being is making these things a little bit softer steel can allow the lock to I even hesitate to call it fail, but become disengaged or whatever if too much impact down on the top of it ends up occurring. However, this thing can, because it's a little bit softer steel, has more malleability to it. So it will kind of conform or change just a little bit if you do something like that. But it also helps overall the life of that lock, because flicking it open and stuff like that does put a lot of forces on there. And this one in particular, it does have a bit of a stop pin that's also built in there. But I don't remember which one didn't. It might have been the Raccoon. It might have been the Cormorant. I don't quite remember off the top of my head. But yeah, it just kind of helps it settle in and remain viable for much longer. So that was kind of his thought process on it. But because in doing that, allowing that to have a little bit of movement in there causes it to become disengaged if you're doing some spine whack sort of stuff going on there. And some people are very, very upset about that. And I can kind of understand that, but from my perspective, button locks are pretty much the least reliable kind of locking mechanism out there that I can think of, at least modern wise. As far as I can tell, less powerful than liner locks and frame locks and lockbacks and all that sort of stuff. And all of them have some issues, and I will definitely go into that in the separate video. But yeah, I did want to address both of those sort of things. Spine whacking, not necessarily something that I particularly like to do. Like I said, I think it does have a place in the industry, but it's usually on the manufacturer during their research and development phase, which they did at least a little bit of that, which is why they came to the conclusion that they wanted this to have a little bit softer steel for that lock bar piece there to allow the knife to remain in a viable situation a little bit longer in the long term. But yeah, still, I mean, my particular thoughts on basically any locking knife is I think of it as assisting me in keeping the blade open. But really, you should, with any folding knife, basically assume that it's going to be a slip joint, where if you actually get a lot of that assumption down in your mind, you're going to be a lot safer overall, because you won't put your knife in a lot of other kind of crazy ways of that. I don't know, some people are like, oh, I don't use my knife as a hammer. And like, well, for one, you're not using anywhere near that much force. I don't know, unless you're DBK and you're doing it with like a giant fixed blade with a 1/4 inch spine or something ridiculous like that. But on a standard knife, no, I don't really think that's viable. So those are usually the people who are knee jerk to the people who are teasing them about, hey, this knife sucks because it fails or something like that. The internet basically operates in binary. It's either good or bad, and you have to be on one side or the other, and that's how arguments work. And it's leached into politics. Drives me crazy because no one actually can have an actual conversation. They must have their opinion heard and the end of it. And that's just not how the real world works, unfortunately. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I mean, I certainly don't spine whack my knives because it does put impact and or possibly destructive forces on the knife. And I want to keep these things outside of the blade because I actually want to use the knives basically as stock as possible, especially if I'm doing a review or something like that for them. So I don't really work on any kind of destructive testing on any of my knives, and I'm not really particularly interested in doing so. There are people out there that do that. Hey, kudos to them. Some of that stuff is fairly interesting for the lot of us. But if you're someone who is worried that because doing some spine whacking on this particular knife causes that lock to disengage on it means that this knife is invalid, it probably wasn't for you. And generally, do not look for a button lock. Doesn't matter what company it is. Kaiser, Civivi, ProTech, Kershaw, any of those. The button lock is kind of the weakest link in that whole thing there. And almost all of them, it really comes down to how thin it is that it's actually they're blocking the steel, and it generally only engages with half of the blade and stuff like that. So I don't know. I just wanted to throw this in at the end of this particular video because it's fairly important and something that's kind of making the rounds with these guys in particular right now. I just kind of wanted to throw my 2 cents in there that seems to be a little bit more level-headed than what I end up seeing on social media, and that's I don't know. For me, that seems to be a little bit important right now. Just to have a little bit more of a sane look at it. But I guess on the plus side, putting these things back together is actually quite a bit easier than trying to deal with the little plunger lock outside of the blade tang. It really just sits in there super nice. And something that is a little bit different about them is they have kind of that pivot collar on both sides there that interface with the liners. So I do kind of like that. Does kind of give a little bit of a different rigidity factor in there. Overall, having just being able to interface a little bit better with the G10 or the micarta in the Raccoon's case. But there you go. As far as I'm concerned, I treat basically all of my knives when I'm actually using them like it's a slip joint with an assist that keeps the blade open, not something that I'm really going to risk life and limb or assume that it's going to work for me under a terrible situation. So, alrighty, I'll attach this to the end of the video. I appreciate y'all for watching, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your day, yo. Subscribe.